John. Hi, everyone. A few years ago, I saw a job advertised, and the heat reminded me of this in one of those pastor's job things that we look at from time to time. And the job was at a surfer church in Brazil. And in the job, it actually said, you're going to have to be comfortable with seeing women in your congregation in bikinis straight off the beach. That's nice. So, I've got a lot of things to say to you this morning, but you're going to have to work quite hard to get anything out of it. You do that? I've got stuff to give you, but to get it, you're going to have to work. Shall we start? In Mark chapter 5, it says that Jesus crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake, and a crowd gathered around him while he was by the lake. So what Mark is saying here is that even before Jesus sets foot onto the beach, there are lots of people there waiting for him, and I presume that they're waiting with some urgency. Perhaps the sort of urgency that you can see in this image here. This was taken in the French town of Lourdes, and as you can see, many of the people in the photograph are suffering from quite serious illnesses, and they've come to Lourdes because they believe it to be a place of healing. And I think it's fair to assume that for some of these people, the pilgrimage to Lourdes has been undertaken as a very last resort. These are people who've seen the doctors. They've gone to the appointments with the specialists. They've taken the treatments and nothing has worked, and now they're desperate. And when you're desperate, you'll try anything. So that's very much the crowd in this morning's story. For the most part, they come from a village called Capernaum. And in Capernaum, Jesus is a well-known faith worker, healer type of individual. And if you if you live in the ancient world and a miracle worker, faith healer comes to your village, the sorts of people who are going to go and see him are going to be the sorts of people who've seen the specialists, who've taken the treatments, and for whom nothing has worked. The crowd by the water waiting for Jesus are a desperate crowd. They're the sort of people whose only hope is the long odds of a miracle. This explains why, in the next sentence, one of the synagogue rulers named Jairus was there. Seeing Jesus, he fell at his feet and said, "My little daughter is dying. Please come and lay your hands on her so that she will be healed and live." Now, to understand the subtleties of this sentence, you have to first of all understand that this man would have been one of the most important men in his community. He was the Rosh HaKnesset, the head of the gathering. To get to his station in life, he would have had to have been very successful. He would have had to have been very well respected. And as such, he would have always carried himself with an assured air of importance and confidence. And in the culture of the East, important people walk. They never run. They talk. They never shout. And they never, ever, ever beg. However, this man's, notice how the writer puts it, little daughter is dying. Now there's some words that don't belong together in the same sentence. Little daughter and dying. And as soon as you read about a daddy and his little girl who's unwell, you as a human being immediately enter into the pathos of the story. The tone of voice here is desperate. It's, I'll give anything. I'll do anything to make this better. I'm desperate. I'll try anything. And so, Jesus, you've got to come. You've got to help. I'm the leader of the synagogue, and I was there that day you healed that guy in my synagogue. I heard the stories about the stuff you did in Capernaum on your last visit. You've got to come. It's my little girl. Name your price. Whatever. It's my little girl. It's my little girl. And Jesus agrees to go with him. And as soon as he does so, the father no doubt feels some instant relief. And so off they go. However, with not a moment to spare, Jesus is forced to spare a moment. Next sentence. Mark says that a woman was there. Now remember, this is a crowd with lots of desperate people in it. Lots of trouble, lots of sickness. And we're told that this woman had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. Now, when Mark, as a man, makes this oblique reference to bleeding, this is his prudish, first century male way of talking about some kind of vaginal menstrual problem. And one of the words that Mark uses to describe this problem is the Greek word mastigos, from which we get our word masochism, which is interesting. Because as he talks about the problems this poor woman is having down below, the word he chooses to describe those problems is a word that is normally associated with pain and humiliation and suffering. You see, if you were a woman living in the ancient world and you had the kind of problem that this woman was having, the physical symptoms of your problem were only half your battle. Things like shame and humiliation and social exclusion were woven into the small print of her religious culture. Imagine if every Sunday here at the cinema we had some bouncers at the door of cinema number 3 here. Actually, some of the Italian gentlemen that we have actually do look like bouncers. We find it helpful at offering time. But imagine here at Cinema 3 we had some bouncers at the door, and rather than welcoming you into the cinema, they instead asked you a few leading questions. Like, did you read your Bible this week? Did you say your prayers? Did you think any naughty thoughts? How many cigarettes did you smoke? Did you do any drugs? And how about we then use those answers to segregate the seating? How about the people whose lives measured up and were good and moral and religious in a way that we approve of? How about they get to join us here in Cinema 3? Whereas all the people whose lives don't measure up and are a wee bit complicated and a wee bit dirty, they have to go next door to cinema number 4. That would just be awkward, wouldn't it? Particularly because you'd all be in here and I'd be next door. Cinema number 4. But this is the sort of awkwardness that defines the religious culture of Israel in Jesus' day. Some people were thought to be clean. Some people were thought to measure up. Other people, by virtue of their choices or of fate, were thought to be unclean and not to measure up. The people who were clean and who measured up were the people who were really good at obeying all the religious rules. The people who were unclean were those whose lives fell outside of those rules. So this is the world. Some people are here, some people are here. Some people are clean, some people are dirty. Some people measure up, some people don't. Now, according to the Torah, the Bible of Jesus, the woman with the trouble down below would have been regarded as profoundly unclean. Have a look at this. This comes from a weird part of the Bible called Leviticus. It's basically a collection of rules written mainly by men. And this rule says that when a woman has a discharge of blood for many days at a time other than her monthly period, or has a discharge that continues beyond her period, she will be unclean. Any bed that she lies on will be unclean. Anything she sits on will be unclean. Whoever touches them will be unclean. Did you notice the word repeated for effect? So this poor woman has a very physical problem, the effects of which are not entirely physical. She is socially ostracized. She is excluded from her community. She can't attend the synagogue. She can't go out in public. She can't meet with her friends. She is an outcast. And according to verse 25, she's been one for 12, I imagine, very long years. Question, stepping out of the text for a moment. Have you ever been in a situation, have you ever been going through something that you have considered somewhat embarrassing, and it's made you afraid to go out? Afraid to meet people? Scared to leave your house and go shopping in case you bang into someone you know and you can't handle the knowing glances and the judgmental looks and the criticisms? And the sadness, of course, of being in that situation is that what you're going through is already bad enough. But you then impose upon yourself, or allow others to impose upon you, a shame and a humiliation that is unhelpful and unnecessary. This is the world of this poor woman. In verse 26, we read additionally that she had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors. If you have a medical problem, particularly if it's a protracted problem, as this woman's is, you will go and see any and every specialist you can get your hands on, and rightly so. And in the ancient world, the advice of medical specialists given to women with gynecological problems makes today for rather humorous reading. For example, in the Talmud, one specialist advises women to drink wine mixed with aluminium powder, rubber, and garden crocuses, the effect of which is to make a woman violently ill, and the thinking is that as she vomits, she will vomit out whatever it is making her sick. Another specialist apparently thought that eating Persian onions, ordinary onions, wouldn't do. Persian onions mixed with wine and garlic would do the trick. And if it didn't, it would make you smell so bad that no one would come close enough to you to notice that you had a problem. And apparently, most specialists in the ancient world thought that gynecological problems were best solved by shock therapy, throwing women into baths of ice water and so on and so forth. So you understand what this text means when it says that this poor woman suffered, not just at the hands of her ailment, but also at the hands of medical specialists. She's been through many a long year of wild and wacky stuff. You further understand what this text means when it says that in her suffering she'd spent all she had. Being sick in the ancient world was an expensive proposition. Mixtures of rubber and aluminium powder and garden crocuses and onions, ordinary ones won't do, they have to come from Persia. It's all very expensive. It still is. If you get sick, as many of you know, you find yourself spending hundreds of dollars a month on pharmaceutical treatments and many hundreds more on alternative remedies. So you know, don't you, that over a 12-year period, this, no pun intended, this, oh come on, this poor woman has exhausted all her wealth on every kind of crank, therapist and peddler of alternative remedies. And lamentably, we are told that instead of getting better, she was getting worse. And so she's now desperate. And when you're desperate, you'll try anything. And so in verse 27, Mark says that she's heard about Jesus. In other words, she's heard about his ability to heal people. However, unlike the ruler of the synagogue, a man of success and importance, she doesn't have the confidence to walk up to Jesus face to face and say, "Hi, I'm sick, can you help me?" And so this woman approaches Jesus surreptitiously from behind, on the quiet, and touched his cloak, because she thought, if I just touch his clothes, I'll be healed. So you understand that strangeness by understanding that this woman has spent the last 12 years of her life thinking that she is no good, that she's unclean, and that she's dirty. She almost certainly has no friends. She almost certainly lives alone. She's not used to people. Step out of the text for a moment and imagine what it must be like to be her. When you believe the things that people say about you, when you accept their definitions of you and of your failure and of your uncleanness and of your lack of suitability for the religious life, those definitions can become true. They can form your reality if you allow them to. Part of the tragedy of your story is that you feel the way you feel is because you have allowed other people to make you feel that way. So this woman, with a self-esteem barely above ground level, sneaks up to Jesus, too scared, too shy, no confidence, no self-esteem, and she touches him from behind the back of his clothes. Now, in the ancient world, people were believed to possess power, and sometimes that power was conveyed by touch. For example, have a look at this. I think I've got this slide. Yes, this is by an ancient historian called Darren, and in this line he's talking about Alexander the Great, who you've heard of, and Darren says that crowds ran to him from all sides, some touching his arms, some touching his knees, some his garment, all in hopes of being baptized with his aura and power. So the thinking was, if I touch you, if you're special, some of your specialness will rub off on me. So this woman's thinking, there's some kind of magic about Jesus, and that magic might help me. If only I get close and only I touch him, then I'll be healed. And interestingly, the word healed that she uses in this sentence is in fact the word saved. She's desperate. She's dirty. Salvation is only for the desperate and the dirty. It's not for the clean. It's not for the people who are good all of the time. It's not for the people whose lives measure up and whose lives are perfectly put together. If that's you, I'm happy for you, but Jesus didn't come for you. Jesus came for the sick, for the messed up, for the broken, for the embarrassed, for the unclean. I'll tell you one of the things I'm really loving about our new church. Almost every Sunday morning when we're having coffee and cakes out there, there's someone I speak to. And the conversation goes something like this. Hey, how's it going? Did you have a good week? No, it was really crap. I love that. I love the honesty of it. I love the reality of it. If you've got issues and your life is complicated, and worries and anxieties and all the junk of life, Jesus is for you. Good news, my desperate friends. Anyway, what was I saying? So this woman does what she shouldn't do. She is a social outcast, touches Jesus the rabbi, and sure enough, next sentence, we're told that immediately her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. Nice. However, verse 30, at once Jesus realized that power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" I like to imagine with a Gallic shrug on his shoulders. Hey, what are you doing? Now notice the question. Jesus asks, "Who touched me?" And the disciples are like, "Dude, everyone's touching you. We're in a crowd. Can't breathe for people here." But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. The word kept is significant. The woman in this story wants a something. She wants a healing. Jesus, however, wants a someone. He wants a person. His work isn't about the stuff he does or even the stuff he says. His work is about encountering people in their mess, in their dirt, where they are. As a Jewish religious teacher, in this moment, Jesus should be freaking out that this kind of woman has touched him. He should be reaching for the hand sanitizer. He should be taking his clothes to the dry cleaners immediately. Every single one of his contemporaries would have been disgusted at what had just happened to him, but not Jesus. Jesus wants to meet this woman. He wants to know her and be known by her. And I say that to you because I think we often approach Jesus for a something. Jesus isn't in it for a something. He's in it for a someone. You. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet. Trembling with fear, she told him the whole truth. This woman has spent the last 12 years telling no one the whole truth. She spent the last 12 years hiding, scurrying around in the dark, embarrassed, ashamed, convinced that she's unclean and unlovable and that no one would want to know her. Every time this woman steps outside of her front door, she does this mental calculation. Am I going to meet someone I know? Am I going to bleed? Am I going to have an embarrassing situation? Maybe I'll just stay inside. This woman does nothing out in the open. This woman tells the truth about nothing. And I think that this moment, in public, telling people the whole truth, is part of the healing for her. I think that many of the demons in our lives have power over us only because we keep them in the dark. We're not open. We're not honest. Maybe sometimes just having the balls to stand up and say, do you know what? I've got a problem. And here it is. Maybe that, for many of us, is the first step on the road to betterment and improvement. Maybe that's why AA meetings, they insist on standing up at the start and saying, my name is so-and-so and I'm an alcoholic. Maybe there's something in that. Maybe the things that beat us only beat us because we keep them in the dark. Next sentence, he says, daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering. What is faith? What is faith? Is it believing in something that you know isn't true? Is it believing in something in spite of evidence to the contrary, something unlikely? In the Bible, the word faith means to be persuaded of facts and then to place your trust, your confidence in those facts. This woman has accepted as fact that Jesus can help her. And she has then allowed that fact to push her way to the front of a busy crowd, regardless of the embarrassment, and touch Jesus. Then in verse 35, the drama intensifies. While Jesus speaks with this woman happily, people then arrive from the home of Jairus, whose daughter is ill, remember him, with bad news. While Jesus has been speaking with the woman, the young girl has died. This interruption, so profitable for the woman, has cost the life of the man's little daughter. Hope is now lost. The conclusion is therefore inevitable. Why bother Jesus anymore? No need to come. It's too late. However, ignoring what they said, ooh, that's a nice sentence. Is it comforting for you to know that Jesus ignores what they say about you? Jesus told the synagogue ruler, "Don't be afraid, just believe." Now, the word faith and the word belief come from the same Greek word, pistos, which, as I said a moment ago, has got a very specific meaning. Its meaning is to be persuaded of, and to then place your confidence in a certain fact. So when Jesus uses this word faith or belief, he's not thinking about the things you believe in your head. He's thinking about the extent to which you allow the things you believe in your head to affect the way that you live and to influence the things that you do. In that regard, we must say that the word faith is a verb. It's a verb that describes an action of trust based upon a persuasion of facts. Now that's abstract, so let's learn this in pictures. Let's say that last night you won the lottery, in which case I look forward to finding out what the offering was. And one of the things that you've always wanted to do is go shopping in New York. And now that you're a newly minted millionaire, you don't want to go on a plane with the great unwashed. You want to go on your own private jet. So you go down to the airport and you charter yourself a plane. Who do you choose to fly the plane? Cheryl, the girl at the newsagent at the airport? Paul, a security guard? Or this guy who's a pilot of 20 years' experience? Now let's say in mid-flight the plane develops mechanical difficulties and you have to put on a parachute and jump out. You've got 3 parachutes to choose from. Each parachute has a label on it saying who packed it. Which parachute do you choose? Do you choose A, the parachute packed by the Boy Scouts as part of their fundraising jamboree? Do you choose B, the parachute packed by Dave, the guy who sells you fruit and veg on your way to work every day? Or do you choose C, parachute packed by Mike, ex-Navy SEAL and qualified parachute instructor? And then you jump out of the plane and you make it to New York and you do some shopping. And while you're there, you decide to get financial advice. From whom do you solicit the financial advice? Desmond, the guy you met down the video store? Sarah, the fitness instructor at the hotel you're staying at? Who does have amazing pants? Or Stephanie Simmons, the Zurich-based financial advisor currently in New York on business? Do you get the idea? Do you get the idea? The word faith describes what you do when you place your trust in a person whom you have concluded is able to do a certain thing, be it fly a plane or pack a parachute or invest your money. So faith is, you know what, I've been persuaded of the facts. And my response to that is then to place my confidence, my trust, sometimes my very life in the light of that of which I am persuaded. So do you understand what Jesus is saying here? He's saying, Jairus, you've seen me in the synagogue. You've seen me heal people. You've heard from all over Capernaum that I can do this stuff. You've just seen this woman get healed. Those are the facts. Now what are you going to do? How are you going to respond? So Jesus arrives at the house, and in verse 38 we read that when he got there, the funeral was already taking place. In this part of the world, they bury people the same day that they die. They came to the home of the synagogue ruler. Jesus saw a commotion with people crying and wailing loudly. Now, in some cultures, I imagine most cultures, a funeral is an opportunity to show other people how important you and your family are. This was very much the case in Israel in the first century. People used to hire professional mourners who were particularly adept at crying and singing. What's funny about that? Why is it funny? I'm giving you like top quality jokes and nothing. And I mentioned professional mourners, and we laugh. Okay. It's okay with me to have a weird church. I like it. Right? So here's Israel. You have these professional mourners, hilarious people, and the more important you were, the more professional mourners you hired. This man, remember, is the ruler of the synagogue. He's a successful business person. He's a man of standing. He's perhaps the most respected person in the village. So can you imagine how many professional mourners show up for the funeral of his little girl? Let me read you an anthropological account of what these professional mourners sound like at these funerals. They're always women, because they're better at crying. The women, is that racist? Sorry, I always get those mixed up.
That's right.
The women form a circle around the leader of the dance of death. The dance of death. They have a name for it. And they dance rhythmically from left to right around the corpse with their hair hanging down. Gradually they increase their mournful lament and the wild movement of their hands and feet until their faces become flushed to a high degree and appear especially excited as the time of burial draws near. So picture the scene. It's a room in a house, and there's a wee dead girl in the middle of the room, and there's a bunch of women, and they're moving, and they're singing, and they're crying, and it's awful. And just when this awful lament reaches a frenzied pitch, Jesus walks into the scene and says, "Stop. The child is not dead, but asleep." Verse 40, they immediately snap out of their frenzied crying and laugh at him. Now that's not very nice, laughing at a funeral. But they are right to laugh. These people do this for a living. They've been around 1,000 dead people. They know full well that this person isn't sleeping, but is in fact dead. Really dead. They are hardcore realists for whom the realities of life have foreclosed against any kind of salvation. And it's the same for us by and large. We too are realists. We too have looked at areas of our lives and concluded that, well, that's just the way we are. Those habits will never be kicked. Those dreams will never be achieved. Those goals will never be reached because that's the way it is. And we convince ourselves that nothing is going to change. And when we convince ourselves that nothing is ever going to change, then guess what? Nothing ever changes. I think that the hardest sales job that all of us have to do is on ourselves. The hardest sell is to tell ourselves that things can be different and things can be better. The hardest pitch is when we tell our worried heads that there is still hope, that things can turn around. After he put them all out, he took the child's father and mother and the disciples who were with him, and he went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and said, "Talitha cum," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, get up." Actually, that's not quite what it means. That's a translation of what it means. What it actually means in Aramaic is "ma wee lamb," my little lamb. Nice. But so what? Always a good question to ask, having read a Bible story. So what? What is the relevance of this bizarre tale for our lives? The point of these stories, whatever it is, can't be that Jesus healed one woman and caused a dead girl to live again. For if that were the point, it would be largely pointless. For the woman he healed is now dead, and the girl he rose from the dead is now dead. Death is inevitable. The point, I think, of the stories, my troubled friends, is that Jesus is worth trusting. And that the silly rules of religion aren't worth the paper that they were written on. The rules of religion in the background of this story said loud and clear that the woman is unclean. The rules of religion in the background of the story say that Jesus should not touch a corpse. And those silly rules of religion were keeping both of these women from being alive. And Jesus, with typical iconoclasm, says, "You who are unclean and who should never touch me, you're now my daughter. You who are dead and whom I should not touch, you are now alive." Jesus spent his entire life, Jairus, I should say, the ruler of the synagogue, spent his entire life keeping the rules. He was obsessed by the accurate and proper observance of his religion. And in this story, Jesus is saying that's not helping. That's taking life away, not giving it. All you have to do is believe me right now. Have faith in me right now. Trust me right now. So what are we to do with this story? Well, maybe every now and again, more regularly than we do, I would suggest, it's a good thing for us to be willing to abandon the silly rules of our religion. Christianity very easily gets silly. We very quickly get into daft stuff that we should and shouldn't do, and that we all say to one another is very important. Let's have a regular habit in this church of getting past all that and be willing to walk away from it. And let's be willing to look at our religion for what it is and see for ourselves whether or not it is keeping us from life. Let's always be willing to explore the facts of Jesus. And let's above all be willing to live what remains of our life in the light of those facts. Is Jesus worth trusting or not? Is he worth following or not? Is he worth obeying or not? These are our responses to this story. How are we doing for time? Any time for questions? Or do you just want to go somewhere cooler? It's very... One question, maybe. Any questions? Oh, yes, right.
The rule, it doesn't mean the Ten Commandments, right? It's just the other silly rules about all the touching. The Ten Commandments are pretty serious and profound, right?
Yes. Okay, so it's a good question. The question is, there's a whole bunch, the first 5 books of the Bible, there's a whole bunch of rules. 613 to be exact. How much of a geek am I? So in the Torah, there are 613 rules. And some of them are extremely important. Some of them are things that we would take very seriously today, like the Ten Commandments. Some of them are rather bizarre, such as the one that we read. So the question is, how do we handle that? And I think with that question I'm drawn to the teaching of Jesus. Remember, Jesus was asked this question. So what's the most important rule? Even in Jesus' day, people understood some of it was silly and some of it wasn't. Do you remember what Jesus said? Love God and love other people. If you love God and you love other people, you won't go far wrong and you won't do much wrong. That sounds like wisdom I can get my head around. That's only 2 rules, not 613. They kind of tie everything up. Does that make sense? Love God, love other people, and shoot ducks, as the people from Duck Dynasty would say. Good question. Okay, good. Let's pray and then we'll go. Seriously, that's what they say. Love God, love your neighbor, and shoot ducks. Life's better when it's simple. we screw it up by complicating it. Yeah? Heavenly Father, we're so grateful that you have reached your clean, loving hands into our dirty, unclean lives. And we're grateful that you have invited us into your eternal heart, that you've welcomed us into your life. We ask that this week we will enjoy a life of good living, of happiness, of peace, and prosperity. We ask this of you in Christ's name. Amen. Thanks for coming. God bless you. See you next Sunday.